I started my career in planning in 2002 as Kent County's environmental planner, with definitely a passion for environmental protections and cultural resources and just the dynamics of the Eastern Shore, because there are so many different types of land uses and challenges. And really, Kent County has a long-standing reputation of doing such a good job balancing environmental protections, resource protections, and also the industries that feed the economy, which are largely resource-based, with a long history of the maritime industry and also, of course, agriculture, which is the prime industry, not only in Kent, but also in Queen Anne's County, which is where I am now. The second year I was in the job, Hurricane Isabel happened. And actually it was practically my 1-year work anniversary, and Hurricane Isabel happened, and I really got to see firsthand some of obviously the vulnerabilities, but some of the true value of following the regulations and going beyond those regulations, and what value there is in promoting adherence to laws, not just for the sake of the law, but for true environmental and property protections. So many people lost their homes, especially in the Rock Hall area. And it wasn't just the loss of home and property and the emotional turmoil that causes and the financial turmoil that causes, but there were also direct environmental ramifications to the inundation of the floodwaters with toxins like propane tanks and gas tanks and oil spills, and what that did to that ecosystem on a small scale, and of course on a larger scale throughout the bay. And at the same time that recovery was happening, and our department was directly involved in the recovery efforts in terms of documenting that loss for floodplain management and also flood insurance claims. So I really got to learn firsthand about how the federal government processes that type of a disaster, but I also was starting to write the county's first hazard mitigation plan. So it was all valuable in having this immediate knowledge and watching people's lives and watching that reaction and that practical application then of drafting a hazard plan, which was the first hazard plan that the county had to adopt. You look at coastal flooding events and you look at the 100 and 500 year event, but you also look at tidal surge, at wind speeds, and there are other dynamics to a hazard plan that are natural hazards. There are different plans that look at man-made hazards, but this hazard mitigation plan was very specific to natural hazards, how to prevent them and how to handle them when they obviously aren't preventable, like a tornado, an earthquake. But what the hazard plan does is it looks at your resources, it prioritizes resources in terms of funding and who is on board to deal with the management of different programs, and how can we achieve compliance with requirements, but how can we do more to be proactive instead of reactive? Because a part of a hazard plan is reactive. It is, here's a formula for handling an event after it happens, here's what you need to do. But there's also, just as important, a vulnerability assessment and strategies that are very targeted to maybe going above and beyond regulations. That there are circumstances in any community when you do that kind of a vulnerability assessment where there are unique characteristics where different types of environments are coming together in a unique way, with floodplains, with erodible soils, with mapped wetlands, wetlands of special state concern. I mean, there are just so many dynamics. It naturally has led into marrying different plans into what's now happening across the nation, but really what's really happening in Maryland is a focus on coastal resiliency, because what coastal resiliency does is it really looks at everything. One thing that you fight against is a lot of misunderstanding about why things are happening. So a lot of people say with the Ellicott City is a good example, the Ellicott City flooding and the frequency of the flooding. So you just mentioned the 100-year and the 500-year flood, and those are regulatory models. But a lot of people, when they think about that terminology, they're thinking we have one flood and then we shouldn't have another one in 100 years. And that's not the way it works. It's really what it is, and the federal government tried to change the nomenclature. I don't think it'll ever stick, but it's really, you have a 1% chance annually of this kind of event because of your elevation, because of the ground elevation. There's this pilot project that's called Resiliency Planning and Financing. And Queen Anne's, Charles, Anne Arundel, and the city of Annapolis have started this exercise. And we've completed phase 1, which is analyzing our vulnerabilities and trying to prioritize our strategies. The second phase of that exercise is to figure out how to pay for initiatives to implement these strategies. Here is where we're at this crossroads. If we're going to do a fiscal analysis and we're going to ask local governments to dedicate funding to discuss us levying taxes, or to ask developers and property owners to meet an elevated standard, we have to have a definitive or at least agreed upon set of data to legally substantiate all of those decisions. Because what you don't want is a set of conflicting data with discrepancies, or models that aren't grounded in concrete science that you can point to and tell a property owner, okay, we're going to ask you when you build your house to go above and beyond this floodplain elevation. We're going to ask you to implement all of these stormwater management, best management practices, and install, maybe a sewage line to your house, which is going to cost X number of dollars because we don't want to see a septic system here. So we might add quite a price tag for that kind of compliance to an already expensive construction project. And you are always measuring environmental protection and resiliency planning efforts with property rights, because that is important too. That struggle to finally afford this piece of property and build your home there and be a part of the community. I mean, you want all of that to happen. That's all positive. And if you're going to ask someone to spend an extra $70,000, then there had better be a sound science behind it, and that you have to be able to implement those laws equitably to everyone, whether it's commercial development, whether it's a state project, a county project, or a large-scale or small-scale residential project. It has to be equitable and fair to everyone. Right. So that's where it gets very serious, because we have a lot of great committees and we have a lot of great policy documents. as they relate to watershed planning and resiliency efforts. And there's a lot of resiliency planning going on right now here and throughout the country. But those regulatory changes that come about as a result of all of this good planning, that's where we are. We're kind of at the point where we're ready for that, to make sure that it's all fiscally and legally equitable.